When I heard about Dune Awakening, I thought it was going to be just another one of those full loot PvP survival grinds with, maybe just a Dune branded coat of paint, especially since the developers behind it were the same ones that made Conan Exiles, which I wasn't a huge fan of personally. But after trying the open beta myself for a weekend thanks to Carolinger, a really amazing content creator who was kind enough to send me a key that he had, I was really surprised. Really surprised. It isn't at all Conan in the Desert or Ark Survival Evolved, but a clone of it. It's something a lot more thoughtful. And as a fan of Frank Herbert's original books, I found it to be something that feels like it actually belongs in the Dune universe, even if the story isn't exactly following Paul Atreides or the original plotlines. Yeah, there's some base building in there and some survival stuff you've probably seen before, but here, in the context of a planet that's meant to want to kill you, Arrakis, it's actually something that makes sense for once. And maybe one of the most important parts of all of this is that they get the atmosphere right. They nail the way that Arrakis feels. It's not just set dressing, it's a character in its own right, a hostile place that the developers intentionally set up for you to constantly feel the presence of. Beyond that, they also did an amazing job of crafting a really impressive hybrid PvP, PvE, and single-player story experience, without forcing you into one playstyle. It's a refreshing take that I don't think sci-fi or Dune fans are going to want to miss out on. So let me take you through a bit of a detailed impression of my experience over the weekend it was an open beta, and then tell you about the super ambitious endgame that they've got planned. If by the end you like this kind of video and you want to see more Dune content, let me know by hitting that like and subscribe button to show your support. Just as I hope you'll stick around for the generous sponsor of today's video, Incogni. My audience is a smart crowd, and I know you guys already know that being online means your personal info, like your social security number, employment history, address, and more, are being collected and sold by companies to adjust things like your credit score and other crappier things. And you also probably know that when they inevitably get hacked, your identity and other information will be in the hands of people you don't want it to be in the hands of. This actually happened to me a few years ago, and it really sucked. What you might not know though is that there's a way where you can use laws that can force these companies to delete your information, and Incogni's service knows exactly how to automatically reach out and use those laws whenever it catches your information and tell the company to get rid of it. When I signed up, I found out that there were over 90 companies with my personal info, so it's no wonder that I kept getting invited to join scam investor groups. And they've also introduced a new unlimited and family plan in 2025, giving you more control over protection, allowing you to point to any people search website where your info is visible, and one of their privacy agents will take care of the rest for you. So if you want a little bit more peace of mind knowing that your information isn't getting into the wrong hands, you could get a massive chunk of it off the internet today with Incogni. Just head to incogni.com/morphologist and use code morphologist to get 60% off an Incogni purchase. And don't worry, if it's not for you, you can always get your money back with their 30-day money-back guarantee. That's incogni.com/morphologist and use code morphologist. But you might be curious what exactly Dune Awakening actually is, because looking at it from the outside, you, like I, might have just dismissed it as this PvP grind thing that so many other games are doing nowadays. But it is not a hardcore PvP MMO. It is not Rust, but in Dune skin. What it actually is a really cool hybrid combination of optional player versus player, player versus environment with special emphasis on environment, single-player story campaign embedded into a massively multiplayer online open world. It's quite a mouthful, and I'm not surprised the developers have had a hard time communicating what they're trying to do here. But it's part of what makes it such an ambitious project. And it's all woven together in a pretty clever way. The single-player part of it is introduced to you right away from the start of the game, and it serves a twofold purpose. The first is to introduce you to the world of Dune by giving you some useful exposition and to immerse you a bit into the universe. And the second is to introduce you to important key mechanics, leading you all the way to the end of the story, which introduces you to the end game of Dune Awakening around 50 to 70 hours in, according to the game's developers. And the first of these mechanics is possibly the most important: survival in the harsh environment of Arrakis. You wake alone in the deserts of Arrakis with the sun already high above the horizon. As you come to your feet, you begin to notice this heat meter above your head, ever growing, and as it does so, there's this water meter in the lower left-hand corner that ticks down ever more quickly. Instinctually then, you dive into the nearest bit of shade, and here you learn for the first time that the heat in this game is not some abstract concept, but a real survival mechanic that will kill you if you're not careful. You're forced to scan the world now in a very different way. Shade becomes a lifeline, and distances you travel are no longer measured by your curiosity, but by survival. And as day fades to night, you instinctively begin to do what the Fremen have done for generations in the stories. You rest by day and travel by night to conserve your water. But even in the safety of the basin area, any travel you do eventually leads you to open sand where you know exactly what awaits you there. Sometimes it starts subtly, shifting sands and a rasping noise coming from a distance. Vibrations rise, and then suddenly silence is broken by a massive explosion of sand and a thunderous ticking emanating from the glowing maws of a gigantic sandworm. And now you're faced with a brutal question. Do you stay still and pray that you go unnoticed, or do you run for it and risk drawing more attention? It doesn't take you long then to realize that any careless step out into open sand is a death sentence in this game. From then on, you're not just looking for shade, you're looking for escape routes. You learn to keep the high ground in sight, always. And just as you thought you survived the worst of it, a cloud appears on the horizon, approaching with terrifying velocity. And unless you find shelter quickly in the form of an alcove or a cave, its 800-mile-per-hour winds will render your flesh to bone and then bone to sand. This makes Dune a constant adversary throughout your experience that creates this low-grade anxiety that underlies every activity you go about. You're not just navigating a map anymore, you feel like you've been dropped into this living and breathing predatory world where every step you take is a signal sent to something that you can't outrun, something that you can't kill. Your only weapon is your foresight and your planning. Dune Awakening just does immersion better than most games I've played. And we've only talked about the survival mechanics and atmosphere so far. The beginning part of the game is structured into chapters or sections of the map, which are open areas you're meant to explore in between these story elements. These bookends to the story are meant to be big crescendos where you use your accumulated knowledge that you've gained through exploring these open PvE/PvP sections to cross a vast expanse of desert where your new knowledge is put to the test. And it's always meant to be this heart-pounding experience. At least it was for me when I tried this in the beta. It pretty much forces an encounter with the worm that you might not survive if you've not timed your traversal well. Another clever thing is how they introduce PvP. PvP can't just happen anywhere. The vast majority of the map in the basin area is all only PvE. It's restricted so you can't just go about killing players. But there are sections that you'll find that are enabled for PvP, and these are typically things like shipwrecks that you'll find lodged in mountainsides or crashed in open deserts. However, those ones in open desert are a bit more dangerous and temporary than the ones on mountains, as they're 100% guaranteed to eventually be swallowed by a worm. So you're not only fighting against players, but you're fighting against the eventuality of it being completely consumed. These PvP areas are high-risk, high-reward areas that always contain more challenging NPCs to face off against, but at the end of these mini-dungeons, you'll find more rare items like better blueprints for weapons or armor, and even materials that you can use to craft some of the more complex items in the game. However, what makes these locations optional is that you can buy most of the items that you can loot in these zones in some of the merchant NPC stores you'll find located throughout the map. But then you might be wondering, how does PvP and combat work if it's not a full loot PvP game? Well, it does enforce a meaningful consequence to death despite not being full loot. In PvE, dying just reduces your equipment's durability, a mechanic tied to the game's crafting system, a loop we're going to go over just a little bit later. But your gear is still returned to you upon death. PvP zones though do become a little bit more risky, where you do have a chance to drop what's in your backpack, although your equipment still does remain on your body when you die. It's only when poor planning puts you in the path of a sandworm or a Coriolis storm that you're gonna lose everything. These rare but total losses reinforce the idea that the environment, not the players, is your deadliest enemy. It's a pretty smart design choice, and it ties directly to Dune's core themes, something that, again, I really appreciate as a big fan of the books. General combat in the game does start off though a little bit slow, and I think this may have affected some people's first impressions of the game who didn't play any further. You are given only a basic set of weapons like some dart guns and some crude knives, and it feels fairly limited. But as you start progressing, there's pacing to the game where as you progress, the game introduces you to more advanced gear and skill trees that open up doors to more tactical combat options. When you start the story's prologue, you get to choose one of 5 skill trees based on your backstory, and each of these grants different lore-based abilities that counter or complement the others, adding a rock, paper, scissors dynamic to PvP. Personally, I wanted to go with more of a Paul Atreides build, so I decided to go with the Bene Gesserit, which, yes, allowed me to use the voice. It's not as overpowered as it is in the books though. It can only be used against players to do basic things like stop them from moving or move them towards you. Otherwise, they might have a counter for it, which is possible for some of the other skill trees. But you're not locked to one tree. Later, you will be able to find some trainers in the world to give you access to the Mentat, Engineer, Swordsman, or Trooper tree if you like, but there are a limited number of skill points that you can get, so you have to commit strategically to the ones that you prefer and fit your playstyle. And you can only choose 3 active skills at once to fit the given situation. So you'll have to pick and choose which is best for a given situation you plan on going into. Later, combat does get a little bit more layered as you add more gear into the mix, like Holtzman shields and suspensor belts, but have a much higher probability of attracting worms faster. In fact, all gear in the game has a stat that tells you whether or not it's going to create more noise and attract those worms, so it's something to pay attention to. Once you face off against a shielded enemy, or if you have one yourself, the attacker has to attack a bit more slowly to penetrate the shield, as it only works against fast-moving objects. And this results in that really cool attack effect you might have seen in the movies, where you attack quickly just up until the edge of the shield and then slowly press in to get the kill, which can be really satisfying when you hit it just right. I found that parrying and then going for the attack prevents me from giving them too much of an opening to counter me. And yes, less guns are in the game, but don't expect to see any explosions. They have been safetied in lore to prevent them from accidentally triggering a nuclear blast. So trying to shoot a shielded enemy should just result in a click instead of a giant boom, which is probably for the best given that this is a game and people would probably end up nuking each other all the time, every single encounter. And then of course there's the spice. In lore, it's this powerful, highly addictive substance that's tied to giving users prescience, which is how guild navigators in the universe are able to traverse the vast distances of space without hitting a neutron star or a black hole. And the only place in the Dune universe that has it is, as you might already know, Arrakis, Dune itself, making it the most valuable substance and the most valuable planet in the entire human imperium. In Dune Awakening then, consuming spice grants a temporary buff and abilities, but use it too much and you'll build up a tolerance requiring more to do the same thing. It also carries with it long-term consequences like withdrawal, although these weren't available to me in the beta, so I can't speak directly to what those might be, but the developers said that there would be one in order to counter the effects of the spice, as it can be a bit powerful to use at times. Crafting and base building are central to everything in Dune Awakening. While you do start with some simple prefab walls, floors, and ceilings, more interesting components unlock as you progress through the game. But bases aren't just cosmetic in Dune, they're your lifeline. They protect you from the environment, preserve your hydration, and serve as your primary crafting hub and base of operation before you set out on any journey on a given day. You'll need to gather resources to build everything from armor to weapons to complex gadgets like personal shields. And as you level up through combat, exploration, and quests, you'll earn intel points to unlock blueprints on your research tree. Alternatively, you can raid some high-risk areas like underground labs for rare blueprints and materials and even additional intel to further fill out your research tree. But one of the things I really love about Dune Awakening is that nothing is permanent. As you use items and as you die, inevitably, your items lose durability over time, which keeps you going out and exploring and scavenging for yet more materials and yet more blueprints to craft better items. Some are even more rare, with blueprints that are only single use, encouraging constant movement and engagement with some of the more difficult areas of the map. One of my favorite discoveries was that you can actually craft a crysknife, a powerful melee weapon made from a sandworm's tooth, but only after you get eaten by one. A little brutal reward to an otherwise kind of disastrous event. But all this crafting is meant to help you progress towards the final part of the story, the deep desert beyond the shield wall. Essentially, all of the zones that you've played through in the basin are in preparation for entering this area, a sort of tutorial area. One that granted does last 50 to 70 hours, so it's not a small portion of the game. And eventually along the way you'll be asked to align with one of two major houses, Atreides or Harkonnen. This choice impacts your perks, builds your alliances, unlocking the political part of the endgame experience. It also ties into the lore of the alternative timeline in which this game is based, where Paul Atreides was never born and the houses remain locked in open competition. Each week then, player activity across the game feeds into a global score system that determines which faction controls the Landsraad. The leading faction gets to enact one of 3 randomly chosen decrees. Buffs, nerfs, or world modifiers like expanded PvP zones or increased taxes then are applied to everybody else. It's a clever way to keep the world a bit more dynamic, but the real challenge lies beyond the shield wall in the deep desert. It's a massive, fully PvP environment spanning hundreds of square kilometers, and unlike the basin, which is capped at around 40 players per instance, the deep desert is a persistent and large-scale server-meshed environment. Exploration here uncovers a fog of war type map which you can sell or share with other players. The better you scan, the more detailed and valuable your map becomes, and guilds will race to capture resources like spice blows, abandoned facilities, or ancient relics, all before the weekly Coriolis storm wipes everything away. And that storm, though, isn't just some dramatic reset. It's a world reshaper. Each week, then, they'll introduce a new handcrafted map built using internal tools that allow them to craft them very quickly. Funcom has already said they have 20 maps ready to go for launch, with more on the way. The result then is going to be this constantly shifting world where no one faction can dominate forever, and the mysteries of the deep desert always remain yet to be discovered. The deep desert then brings everything together: navigation, logistics, guild coordination, worm sign detection, and PvP. It's a bold and ambitious system that feels authentically Dune. Now personally, I've only had around 20 hours in the safer basin area, but from what I saw and what's been promised, this could really be something special. And it's what's got me so excited about the prospect of playing Dune Awakening when it comes out. If Funcom then can deliver on this vision and they can hold the line on avoiding a premium shop or microtransactions like they say, I can easily see Dune Awakening becoming a long-term obsession for me. And I've already picked up a copy for myself. So will I see you soon on Arrakis? Let me know down below if this game interests you. And until then, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.